Morning, ladies. I'm going to switch my video off now. Hi. Can someone just say hello to me? Because it's so quiet. I keep thinking my headphone's not working. Hello?
Sorry, Belinda. Yes, I can hear you.
That's all right.
Hi, Belinda.
Hi, Andrea.
Hello.
I can't hear anybody. Is there anybody? I could see you there. That's fine. Thank you.
So is everything sorted now?
Morning, members. Just to remind you that you are now being broadcast. So just remember that when you're speaking. Thank you.
Hello, it's Kath. Hello, it's Kath Potter. Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Kath. Morning, Kath. Just a reminder that you're being broadcast now. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock. And I think we're just having a little problem trying to sort out YouTube. So we'll just give it a minute till Alden House give me the okay. Thank you.
Good morning, Robert.
Morning.
Robert.
So if you've just joined us, we're just trying to sort out YouTube, and I wonder if Alden House has got, yes, we've got an update, so we're ready to start now. So welcome to everybody to the planning meeting on the 12th of March 2001. We'll start with a roll call of members. Any apologies for absence, which I haven't got any, and any members' declarations of interest. If I can just start with the declarations of interest. I've had an email for item 8 and an email for item 5, and also for item 5 I will be declaring an interest, so I'll be handing over the chair to Ken for that item. So over to Alden House for the roll call then, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll go down the list of members. If you can confirm you're here and let us know of any declarations of interest when I call your name, please. Councillor Armitage.
Yeah, Sam here. Declaration of interest regarding Birchcroft Monash.
Councillor Brady.
Here, sorry, I couldn't get the thing to work. Here, I've had the same 2 emails that Robert has had, and I am slightly acquainted with the applicant in 8, who's known in this part of the world.
Sorry, Robert. Councillor Brady, you were breaking up then. I didn't quite hear what you said.
I said I had the same 2 emails that Robert had, and I also am slightly applicant in agenda item 8, who is somebody who's well known in this part of the world.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chaplin.
Good morning, everyone. I've had the 2 emails, Caroline McIntyre for agenda item 5 and Caroline Payne's email for agenda item 8. On item 6, the Lady Canning's plantation is within the boundary of Sheffield City Council, and I see that Sheffield City Council officers have taken a view on this item. I have to say I've not been consulted, and therefore I'm approaching this with an open mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Present and same 2 emails.
Councillor Gregory.
Present and same 2 emails, thank you.
Miss Harling.
Morning, everyone.
Councillor Hart. Councillor Hart. Thank you. Councillor Huddleston.
Present and the same 2 emails, agenda item 5 and 8.
Councillor McCloy.
Present, same 2 emails, and for application number 8, agenda item 8, personal interest. I've met the applicant previously with the outgoing director of planning, and I've had email correspondence with the applicant subsequently, but I keep an open mind and have no predetermination.
Thank you. Councillor Potter.
Present and the same 2 emails, 5 and 8. Thank you.
Councillor Richardson.
At present, I've received those emails, but as a matter of principle, I don't read them because I think it's an unfair advantage, so no interest.
Miss Slack.
Present, I had the same emails. Item 5, I know the applicants well, so I'll refrain from voting. And item 8, I know the agent personally very well and will refrain from discussion to avoid any perceived interest conflicts. Thanks.
Mr. Smith.
Present and same 2 emails, so items 5 and 8.
Councillor Warmby.
Present and the same 2 emails, 5 and 8.
And Mr. Helliwell. Thank you. You unmute, Mr. Helliwell.
I will learn eventually. Yeah, so yeah, the emails for 5 and 8, and I've got pecuniary interest in item 5, so I will withdraw from that.
Thank you.
Chair, if it's all right, can I just ask Councillor Armitage? He declared an interest in relation to Monash. Is that a personal or a prejudicial interest?
You're muted, Councillor Armitage.
Sorry, I just received the letter.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. So it's just correspondence. So we'll move on then. Minutes of the previous meeting you've had. At the moment, I can only see about half the members. So if the others could just put their videos on if it's possible for a minute, and then can we have someone to propose and second the minutes, please? Proposer, thank you, David. Thank you, Andrew McCloy. So proposed and seconded. Can all members show their hands in favour, please? Thank you. Yeah, so they're passed. Thank you. I've no urgent business. Public participation, the list has been circulated and we'll come to those as we go through the meeting, which then takes us on to item 5. And if you just bear with Alden House while they get rid of me and put me in the waiting room, I will hand over to Ken Smith. Thank you very much.
Okay, Alden House, has Robert been suitably removed? Lydia?
Yeah, I need to leave as well.
And I was going to say Lydia needs to be secured elsewhere. Nothing personal, Lydia. Okay, as both have disappeared, we'll move on to item 5, which is a full application of the erection of an affordable local needs dwelling, works of hard and soft landscaping, and other works incidental to the proposals at Littondale, Lytton. I believe John Keeley is going to introduce this item. John?
It is me, Chair. Thank you. Good morning, members. This application site is outlined in red there and is located in the valley of Littondale to the southwest of Lytton village. It comprises of a sloping grazing field on the southern side of the Littondale valley, and can be regarded now as being on the edge of the village, given the members will recall the intervening housing at the top right of that map, which I'm displaying at the moment. There is 3 new affordable houses, which you'll recall have been constructed recently, which have infilled what was an intervening gap between the main body of the villages and the Dale house opposite the application site, and the cottages known as Dale cottages just to the northeast of the application site. So they have extended effectively the village to incorporate those previously outlined properties. There is a public footpath which runs between Dale cottages and the application site. It runs up the valley side towards the southeast and over the top of the hill, from which you can get some fine commanding views down over the valley. If we can have the next slide, please. This is zoomed in and shows the proposal, which is for a 4-bedroom house set back from the road, parallel with the road and with the parking area to the southwest, it would utilise the existing access, which is an agricultural access we'll see in the photographs off the dale, and also incorporates an agricultural access into the adjoining fields through the property at the southwestern side of the application red line area. If we have the next slide, please. So this shows the like an artist impression of the location, and it shows on the top right the slope of the field from the road, and you can just see the apex of the garage of the adjoining property at the end of Dale Cottages. If you look on the southwest, right, you can leave that one on, thank you. And this is as proposed. You can see the position of the house in relation to that garage, the parking area, utilising the same access off the road and the agricultural field gate into the field. There is an intervening line of trees you'll see in the photographs between the application site and the road, and there's an elevated footway at that point. And again, bottom right, the artist's impression of the proposed house sat within the plot. Next slide, please. So this is the looking towards the application site from the villages behind us. So we're looking away from the village at this point. You can't see the property Dale House on the right hand side, but on the left there is the garages associated with the end property at Dale Cottages. And you can just see the agricultural access just beyond the red for sale board there that leads into the field, which will be the access to the application site and the line of trees. And you can see at this point how, having left the village, and we saw on the site visit yesterday, you leave the more steeply sided Dale, and there's a distinct change in the landscape to more open views at this point. Next slide, please. This is a close-up showing the footpath there next to the yellow sign notice, which leads up between Dale Cottages and the application site, the agricultural access. And although there's a footway here, the footway doesn't extend all the way back up to the village, so there is a need to take to the road. I beg your pardon, I've left my phone on. Let me just bear with me, members, one moment. I just need to stop. Apologies for that. I was getting a separate phone call. Right, so can I have the next slide, please? This is another view looking head on, looking up the valley side again with the Dale Cottage garage to the left. And the next slide, please, which pans right. And the next slide. And this is looking back up towards the village with the application site on the right there. So the position of the house would be set back from the road, and the front elevation of the house would be approximately in line with the apex of the gable there. And the next slide, please. The proposal, as I say, it's a 4-bedroom house. Next slide, please. Typical ground floor. And the next slide. It will be constructed from limestone with gritstone detailing under a blue slate roof, and would have timber windows and doors. So there are no concerns about the design of the house itself, which would be of traditional size and design. Next slide, please. It would have reasonably narrow gables. And the next slide. And this is the rear elevation, looking up the hillside. Again, reasonably traditional detailing. And the next slide. And the other gable, which would be blank. This would be the one which would be facing up towards Dale Cottages. The next slide, please. That's the end of the slides. So there are no concerns about the design or of the house itself or the amenity in relation to the adjoining properties. The main issue in this case is the need for the house and the landscape impact of constructing a house in this location. In terms of need, our policies, as you're aware, operate on an exceptions basis. So only exceptionally would we allow housing on the edge of a village if there was clear evidence of a local need for the house and also that it could be accommodated without harm. In this case, the applicant hasn't provided any evidence of need via the home options, as we require to provide an independent assessment of need, as was the case with the recent housing on the opposite side of the road, which we approved. Also, in this case, the applicant owns his own home. He lives in Bradwell, so he's not local to Lytton, and his current house meets his needs. Although, of course, we understand people's normal desires to move on in life and have a larger home. That's a desire, not a need in this particular case. So fundamentally, in this case, without a clearly evidenced need for the house, the officer recommendation could only have been one of refusal. Coupled to that, there are also strong landscape objections to development of this site in the way it's proposed. The house will be set back from the road. It will be cut into the elevated ground, and clearly would not reflect the pattern of development in the immediate locality or the developments characterising Lytton Village. And as a result, it would appear, in our view, an incongruous form of development in this setting, which would harm this special landscape. We note that the access concerns from the higher authority could be resolved. There looks to be space to provide visibility displays, although there would be some concern about creating a ramped access at 90 degrees to the road to get up to the level. Nevertheless, we didn't ask for amended plans given the fundamental objections on landscape and need grounds. I should also point out, in terms of the applicant's need, he lives in Bradwell Parish at the moment, and we have obviously recently approved a number of affordable houses in Bradwell, which are under construction and consented, and we have no evidence of any attempts to put his name down for those houses, which would be more local and appropriate to meet his need, should he be able to evidence that need through the normal channels. So for those reasons, Chair, the recommendation of officers is one of refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I believe we have one speaker, Mr. Richard Baker, the applicant, a video presentation. So over to Oldham House for that, please.
Good morning. My name is Richard Baker and I am the applicant for this item. I have lived in Brough in our current home since I was a child. I now live with my partner Laura, who is originally from Flag, and my sister, who has lived in the cottage since birth. I was given the opportunity to buy the cottage on the provision that I would look after my sister. She often works away, so having her living with us makes sense, as she is not always around, but she needs her own space for when she is home. Our current home has 2 bedrooms, and we are starting to think about having children. Unfortunately, there is no option to add an extension here, so will not meet our needs. The application site is a small part of farmland owned by my father. As well as working as a local builder in Lytton and Tysewell, I have had to take on more responsibility on the farm due to my father's ill health. I understand that we don't have enough land to justify an agricultural dwelling, as I don't do this full time. However, being close to the land would make a big difference in terms of security and being on hand when cows are calving. Our current home is in Bradwell Parish. Tysewell Parish is a neighbouring parish to this. Bound to Tysewell is the middle of the road. We are within only metres of this. Lyttondale has been accepted as forming part of the village of Lytton. The site is located immediately next to the last property on the edge of the village, with other existing houses extending beyond the site on the opposite side of the road. Locations on the edges are accepted in policy as suitable locations for affordable local needs dwellings, as has been the case at the opposite end of Lytton. We have proposed a larger home to allow us to grow into this and avoid the need to add on to this in the future, but we are happy to discuss this further with officers. We don't qualify for home options because I own our home. However, if I sell this, we don't have the equity to buy anything locally. If we rent, then we eat into the money we have saved by paying off the mortgage and lose the opportunity to build ourselves a home, which gives us a certainty renting doesn't provide. And current rental prices would mean that we couldn't sustain this for very long. The use of home options to determine need seems flawed, as it only takes into account the current situation. The relatively recent change to the policy for affordable local needs dwellings doesn't seem to actually look after truly local people whose families have lived within the area for generations. House prices, including those in Lytton, Tysewell and the wider area, have risen again over the past year. The Peak Park is at risk of becoming a retirement village or just for wealthy families at the expense of local communities. I would therefore ask you to reconsider before you this morning, including the principle of this location for a new home for us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alden House. Okay, members, the issues demonstrated in the report before us, needs affordable house and the design and landscape impact. So members, it's over to you for your views, please. I should say before anyone attend the site visit yesterday with officers, but Robert Halliwell excused himself for reasons already given. So either use the digital hand or raise a hand to indicate you wish to speak, please. But I do need to see people in that case, otherwise you have to use the digital hand. Patrick?
Thanks, Chairman. It's a site I know quite well because it's fairly close to me and I go past it a lot. There are sort of two approaches that we can take, really. This is a national park. And being a national park, one can probably come up with a good reason for saying no to almost anything. But when we want to be positive, as we have been on one or two occasions very recently, we can take a much more constructive and positive view as to what we're trying to do. There is a case which is made in this report for saying, well, this is a site which should never have an affordable house on it. There's also a case which says that this is probably as good a site for an affordable house as you could find in a national park. Those photographs that we were shown in the presentation, the map illustrated it, but the photographs don't show the fact that on the straight opposite, on the other side of the road, is a sizable house and a whole suite of buildings, the use of which I'm afraid I couldn't work out, and which extend considerably further down the lane than this particular site does. 3 meetings ago, or 2 meetings ago, we were told that a man applying for an affordable house couldn't have it because it was visible on the top of a hill. Here we've got a site which is visible, but it's at the bottom of a hill. Now, it is a slightly more open environment than the houses we approved, admittedly against officer advice, further up the road. But nonetheless, it is a site that in terms of the wider landscape, its development would not, in principle, cause a major issue. And I would have some difficulty supporting one of the 2 reasons for refusal, namely that this is a site which can never be used for an affordable house. We are increasingly getting to the point when affordable housing can't be put in the middle of a village because it's a valued open space, and it can't be put on the edge of a village for some other reason. And this strikes me as being as good a site as one could find for an individual affordable house. Moving on to the question of need. Well, we've had this discussion before. Need is a relative issue. Of course, he has a roof over his head. But the explanation we had given to us in the email that was sent, and which has been confirmed by Mr. Baker in his very able presentation, shows that need is a sort of relative thing. And part of that need is a justifiable wish and desire, which most of us have, and probably most of us have achieved, to want to own your own home. And really the option of saying, well, you can go into a small tenanted property in the middle of Bradwell does not suit everybody's reasonable requirements. Some owner-occupied affordable housing is highly desirable in our villages. It creates that sense of ownership and belonging to the village and to the community. And those sorts of reasons, I'm afraid, I have some difficulty with. Also, I do remember sitting round the table in this committee on more than one occasion in the past, or perhaps it was in the local plans group, I can't remember which, and being told that actually the next door parish is the one that's literally contiguous, or the next door but one. We have interpreted it like that in the past, as I recall. So there are a lot of issues surrounding the policy side of this, as opposed to the site issues, that cause me some concern in the way that we're approaching it. I do believe, for reasons which have been fairly stated, that there are issues about this particular application that, if we were minded to give it a fair wind, would require us to go back and see whether we can achieve something better. But in principle, certainly the site I have no problem with. And for that reason, if this is going to be refused, I would certainly abstain from refusal. But for me, this seems to be the sort of thing, if you want affordable housing in your national park, we ought to be going for. If not, somebody needs to come up with a policy which says how it's going to be achieved, because at that moment, we haven't gotten the policy.
Thank you, Patrick. I think in all fairness, having attended the site visit yesterday, it's worth, for the benefit of other members who are not familiar with the site, to note that, yes, there is development on the other side of the road, but mostly it's masked by extensive tree planting. And yes, it forms part of the boundary of the village, but so do the garages and the property that we were shown on the illustrations that John Keeley presented. It's a very definite edge on that side of the road to the village. And I think from a landscape perspective, further up the road into Lytton, the limestone outcrop is very close to the road. So that's why properties are singletons along the roadside. And when you get to that last property on that side of the road, the land opens up like a lodge from some of those slides that John Keeley presented. And the land is lower, the land is more open. It's a very definite boundary between the built-up part of the village and its local topography, and then out into that amphitheatre. I would just remark, I suppose, that with the, as was remarked in the presentation from John Keeley, we have an exceptions policy. We have criteria that need to be met in order to consider something to be an affordable property. And the circumstances of the applicant, one can fully understand, the information that would be required to meet the criteria for affordable housing just aren't being met. And we are in that, we're between a rock and a hard place. We have our criteria, we have our policies, and they don't apply in this particular instance, or so it would seem. So, do any other members have anything to contribute? Mike Chaplin, I believe you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair.
Andrew.
Sorry, was I ahead of Andrew? If Andrew wants to go first.
No. You, Andrew next, and then David Chapman.
No. I've got every sympathy with the applicants in wanting to build an affordable home, and I certainly appreciate the difficulties that there are within this national park, as with most other national parks, where house prices are generally higher than in the urban areas that surround our wonderful parks. But I'm really struggling to come up with some planning reasons for not going along with the officer's recommendation. They seem clear to me, and the views, although I wasn't able to go and visit the site yesterday, it's clear from the photographic evidence presented that it is beautiful countryside there in Littondale, and I can't see why we should be building into the landscape like that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Andrew, and Andrew Gregory as well, after David Chapman. Andrew
Chair,
McCloy.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's always the difficult applications, of course, that come to committee, excuse me, and the ones that push policy. And this is no exception, no pun intended. I too have sympathy for the applicant, and I too am frustrated, that's the right word, that policy which we have to have in place, which has been carefully constructed, still doesn't accommodate some of the wishes and desires of the next generation of local residents who want to not just set up home, but develop and move home. And I see entirely logical that a growing family from Bradwell might want to move to a neighbouring parish or move elsewhere in the Peak District with family connections. But we have got policy in front of us, and it's not our job here in Planning Committee to rewrite policy. That's something ahead of us in the local plan review, where we'll look at these issues in detail. So I find the first reason for refusal awkward but understandable. However, I am convinced by the second reason, and I am with the parish council on this because I do know the site quite well. I do feel that the proposed development, the site is taking the village beyond its natural boundary. I'm worried that if we approve this kind of application, we are encouraging the kind of ribbon development that is undesirable for our nucleated village settlements. And on that basis, Chair, I will move officer recommendation of refusal.
Thank you, Andrew. Do we have a seconder at this stage? Mike Chaplin, thank you very much. David Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. What we have to be careful about here is defining local, because if we're not careful, we will introduce a precedent that, I mean, at the moment we operate under the cascade system where their own parish, then adjoining parishes, and then we move outwards with that policy. But if we allow a situation where somebody can pick and choose which parish they want to put a local needs house in, then we risk upsetting other people who are looking for the same thing. Maybe a resident of Lytton who wants a local needs, and probably the unfortunate thing in this case is that in Bradwell there are quite a number of local needs housing houses that will be available. So it would be logical for somebody wanting local needs to be within their own parish and not being able to skip a parish and choose, because that where does that stop? People could it makes our policy look really no use if we don't enforce this this cascade system. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Andrew Gregory.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to echo what Mike Chaplin had said. I mean, I'm not familiar with the site, and you know, it would have been useful to have had a look myself by way of a site visit. But I take a lot of stock from what the parish council have said in their comments, and I think that's very helpful. I think we have to, you know, observe that and follow that. So I'd put my hand up to second the motion in any event, Chair, after I put my hand up to speak. So yes, I agree with what Mike said. I think he summarised it very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Does anyone else wish to make any comment? We have a proposal and a seconder, so if there are no further comments, and I can't see anyone either waving their hand physically or digitally, I think we should go to a vote then. Alden House, can you conduct the vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll call out each member's name and ask you if you can let me know if you're for, against or abstaining from voting on this item. Councillor Armitage.
For.
Councillor Brady.
In.
Sorry, Councillor Brady, that didn't come through.
In.
Abstain.
Yeah.
Councillor Chapman.
For.
I take that. Sorry, that was Chaplin and Chapman together, I think. Councillor Gregory. Miss Harling.
For.
Councillor Hart still not joined. No. Councillor Huddleston.
For.
Councillor McCloy.
For.
Councillor Potter.
Abstain.
Councillor Richardson.
Against the recommendation.
Sorry, Councillor Richard. Against.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
For.
And Councillor Warmby.
Against.
So that's 8 voted for, 2 against and 2 abstained. Thank you.
Thank you, Alden House. Can we readmit Robert and Lydia, please?
Yeah, we'll sort that out now. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, with a short hiatus whilst we readmit the chair and a member of the committee, so that I can pass the baton back to Robert.
Thank you, Ken. I will start my video in a minute when it decides to, that's it, cooperate.
Okay. All yours,
Yes.
Robert.
Thank you very much. So members, move on to item 6, which is the full application for siting of a mobile coffee unit to be situated at the top of the car park at Lady Canning's Plantation, Sheephill Road, Sheffield. I think this is John Keeley again to take us through this.
It is, Chair. Thank you. Yes, this is the location plan. It's the application site. We'll see probably better on the next slide. But this is it's located just to the south of the small hamlet at Ringelow, which is situated on the crossroads there in towards the centre of that slide. It's right on the boundary of the national park. The national park boundary runs along the road just at the bottom of the site, and we'll see in a little bit more detail on the next slide. You have a public house called the Norfolk Arms at the centre of Ringelow village, but the rest of the village is just a small collection of houses. You have the plantation there, Lady Canning's Plantation, which is home to 2 mountain bike trails, which have proved very popular in recent years, approved by the authority in 2015 and 2016, I believe. And the site is a springing off point for many visitors to the area, seeking to either go cycling there or walk out onto Hounkirk and Burbage Moors, which lie to the left, or come up from Sheffield up the Lym Valley, which you can see there in blue, which runs from Ringelow out to the east. So if we move to the next slide, please. So this is zoomed in as you just to the south of the crossroads. Sheephill Road runs away back to the southeast there. There is, next to the Lady Canning's Plantation, at the start of Hounkirk Road, which is a road which runs from Sheephill Road over the moor towards Fox House and terminates just above the Fox House. There is a small car park, fairly informal, unsurfaced car park, which is used by cyclists and walkers. And the proposal sits in at the southern end of that car park there, outlined in red, and would take up approximately 3 to 3.5 current parking spaces. The land is right on the edge of natural zone. Land to the south of the car park is natural zone. It's also part of the Hounkirk and Burbage Moors, which are part of the Eastern Moors SSSI, also Special Protection Area and SAC. So although the site itself is not of any conservation interest being a car park, it is on the boundary of very sensitive areas which lie to the south and southwest of this site. And it's fair to say, from those members who know the area, this area is under enormous visitor pressures from people coming out from the city and elsewhere to use it as a springing off point for recreational activity. If we have the next slide, please. These were taken on a Tuesday morning, and this is looking up from the corner of Sheep Hill Road. So you have Lady Canning's plantation to the right of this, and we're looking up the Hounkirk Road, which I say leads up to the moors and over the top. And the entrance to the mountain bike trails is just to the right where that fencing is. And this, I think, was around about 10:30 on a Tuesday morning on not the best days, and the car park was full. And you can see that at the very top of the slide, the first of the cars which were extending above the defined car park area. And the application site is just between that top car and the second one down, to give the context. Next slide, please. This is looking back to give you a bit more sense of location. So it's looking from the bottom of the car parking area, that's Sheep Hill Road in the foreground, and you can see parking taking place on the verge to the right, and just a little bit in the gloom, if it wasn't a murky day, you would see the Norfolk Arms Public House, which sits at the crossroads just a couple of 100 metres further down the road. The nearest residential dwelling lies to the left on this slide, just behind that evergreen bush, but that is not affected, would not be affected in immediate terms by the coffee van proposal, given it's already situated next to a car park. Next slide, please. So this is standing at the very top of the car park, and the application site is where the red and silver cars are at the right-hand side. The first two cars there, that's the application site. So, and it would be, there'd be no formal surfacing or anything. The proposal would be just to use a converted small animal trailer or horsebox type vehicle, which we'll see in the next slides, and that would be parked there along with the vehicle that towed it. It would be brought there in the morning, it would trade during the day, and then would be removed at the end of the day. And the idea is that initially they would start at weekends, but normal trading is expected to be Wednesday to Sunday between 10:30 and 4 p.m. And it's the applicant's intention to put out bins to tackle waste, which will be collected and removed at the end of each day. If we go to the next slide, please. This just closes in, shows a close-up of the site there. So everything to the right of the red car is beyond the car park and is then into natural zone. The next slide, please. This is just another view looking down the site. On the next slide. So this is the trailer which will be converted to form the coffee and refreshments bar. The next slide, please, just to show the character, and the next one. The next one. And the last one, I think. Yeah, that was the last one. So in terms of our policies, our policies say that within the open countryside on sites such as this, that retail development would be restricted to small scale activity, which would be ancillary to a business which would already be acceptable under either our economic policies, such as farm shops, or directly related to and ancillary to recreation and tourism facilities, taking into account impact on local centres. In this case, there are no existing recreation or tourism facilities at the site other than just the public recreation of the mountain bike trails. So the two mountain bike trails are the only facilities there, and this mobile coffee shop isn't ancillary to those. The intention is to serve just to general members of the public and passing trade. So in terms of our policy, it wouldn't be related to any recreation or tourism facility or ancillary to them. And is therefore clearly contrary to our development strategy, which is to direct such retail users to within existing towns and villages which are named in our development management policies. So there's an objection in principle to that proposal. Furthermore, within the site itself, the landscape impact of a trailer within a car park setting wouldn't be unduly incongruous given that location. It would result in the loss of, as I said, 3 to 3.5 parking spaces. So would in effect, given the visitor pressures on the area already, result in more overspill onto the adjoining highway verges, which is already causing landscape harm. So it would exacerbate that, contribute to amenity issues for local people who live in the area, and could be evidenced from the objections. And also raise some highway concerns manoeuvring on and off verges rather than within a controlled area of a car park. Members will note the litter has been cited again as in many objections, and in practice we have concluded it would be difficult or almost impossible to manage as visitors disperse from this site over the moors and the footpaths in the wider area or the mountain bike trails, and couldn't be satisfactorily mitigated in the way the applicant has suggested. So overall, we consider that the siting of such a unit like that would have some urbanising effect in terms of bringing that sort of activity into what's effective open countryside rather than a town or village, which would detract from visitors' enjoyment of the area who come to the area for the open, more wilder characteristics of the edge of moorland location. So for all those reasons, Chair, we as officers have recommended refusal as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that, John. We don't have any speakers, any public participation on this item, so it's over to members for questions and comments then, please. So Andrew Gregory to start, please.
Just a question, Chair, for John. I've read the report and I get the point about the fundamental objections to this, but I don't need to remind everybody, do I? We're still in lockdown. We're not going to come out of lockdown for several months. These kind of amenities are actually really important. Fact is, people are getting out there. People need somewhere to go. People need some refreshments. Is there not at least some justification for some temporary permissions, at least to take us through until the autumn in relation to this location?
Yeah, I know what you say, but there are already refreshments available within 150 to 200 metres at the Norfolk Arms Public House, an existing business which is surviving lockdown by doing takeaway sales, etc., as many other businesses are. We're talking about an introduction of a new business here rather than supporting an existing business which is struggling on the site. So it's the introduction of a new facility here. The other point that you were making about a temporary consent, all the harm that we've identified to policy and the area through the landscape impact and litter would be the same as temporary or a permanent consent. So we discounted a temporary consent for those reasons. So I know what you say, but no, I don't believe any of those points are overriding to warrant a change to the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Now I've got a number of speakers waiting. So I've got David Chapman, Mike Chaplin, Kath, Ken Richardson and Andrew McCloy all wanting to speak. So we'll start with David Chapman then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'd start my comment with an apology, and that's an apology to the visitors we've been getting who do have a respect for this national park in the way they behave and the way they keep the park tidy. But I'm afraid in this situation and the situation we've seen since the lockdowns and the lifting of lockdowns is that people don't have the respect. This situation will be where people will buy cups of coffee, will buy bags of crisps, and they'll walk out onto Ringing Low and they'll finish them and dump them, and it's a sad sad reflection on the visitors we get these days, but I'm afraid it's realistic, and I have to be pragmatic and objective, and I'll move officer recommendation. Robert.
Thank you, David. I'll move on to Mike Chaplin then next.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to David Chapman for your comments just now. I visited the site yesterday, and I was very pleased to see that there was almost no litter there at the car park or further up as you walk along one of the on that footpath up to the right. Thankfully, the mountain biking trail is away from the footpaths, and there was no one mountain biking in the hail and showers that we had yesterday. I'd also say that the number of cars there was similar to what John found on Tuesday. It is a well-used car park, and if you take 3 spaces out, that's three more spaces, 3 more cars going onto the road nearby, causing potential risk to accidents. So I'm very much in support of the officer's recommendation based on what I've seen with my own eyes.
So are you willing to second the recommendation, Mike?
No, I'll let someone else second it, please.
All right, thank you. So if we now move on to Kath, then followed by Ken Richardson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I know this area very, very well. Whenever I go to Sheffield, I always drive that way to the Norfolk Arms and down Hangman's Lane. It is continually, every time I've gone, and I've gone twice recently because I had a problem with my car. So I've been in that vicinity, and I'm very concerned. I think that the council, Sheffield City Council, have provided excellent comments, and the Norfolk Arms, whenever you go past now, they serve coffees and things like that, and when I've been, I've seen queues out there, so it is well used, well patronised, and there they can keep a lot of any litter or such like in the bins around there, where if you go up where this has been hopefully cited, again it's the litter problem which has already been spoken against. So I cannot support it. I support totally the Sheffield City comments to the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Kath. And Ken Richardson.
Okay, I agree with the comments in the report, but I would say that it is directly related to the activities. Obviously, somebody's seeing a business opportunity, a car park full of visitors, I can sell them a coffee. But I know the Sheffield City Council would not object to it being moved further up the Alnkirk track. Is that being put forward to the applicant? Or is it just being refused on, would we agree to that? Because people do need to make a living.
Thank you, Ken. I think we'll go back to John on for a comment on that, please.
Well, land beyond the car park is effectively within the natural zone, where there's a very strong presumption against any development which isn't essential to the management of the natural zone, or is for conservation or enhancement purposes. So even stronger objections to what already set out in the report would be in place for any site further up, and for all the other reasons would be exactly the same. I noted the Sheffield City Council's comment, but it seemed contradictory, to be honest. So no further comment than that. Thank you.
Point of order, Chair. We're voting on this particular site. We're not voting on where it might be.
That is correct, David. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. So it's voted on this particular site only. Can we move on? Andrew McCloy, you had your hand up.
I think my point has been addressed, which was the Sheffield City Council comment, which I found interesting but quite contradictory. And then the final other comment I'll make is that let's bear in mind that we do have some recreational user groups. Mountain bikers are one of them, the hardcore mountain bikers, who do make a very positive contribution in terms of looking after the national park and clearing up litter and repairing tracks. So we won't tar everyone with this brush, but I am worried that if we agree to this application, it will have a detrimental effect on a very sensitive spot. So I'm with the officer recommendation here, Chair.
Thank you. We have the motion on the table which has been proposed. I don't have a seconder yet. Does anyone wish to second the motion? Thank you, William. Any further comments or any from members? So we have a motion on the table which is to accept the recommendation that the application be refused. We'll now go over to Alden House for a vote then, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll call out each member's name, and if you can let me know if you're voting for, against or abstaining from voting on the item as discussed. Councillor Armitage.
For.
Councillor Brady.
For.
Councillor Chaplin.
For.
Councillor Chapman.
For.
Councillor Gregory.
Dane.
Miss Harling.
For.
Councillor Huddleston.
For.
Councillor McCloy.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Richardson.
For.
Miss Slack.
For.
Mr. Smith.
For.
Councillor Warmby.
For.
And Mr. Helliwell.
For.
Thank you. So that's one abstain, otherwise carried, Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, members. I think it's now time we had 10-minute break, so if we can reconvene at 10 minutes past 11, please. So welcome back, members. If we now move on to item 7. So this is a full application for the renovation of house and conversion of an agricultural buildings for residential and commercial use. There's a cafe at Townend Cottage, Grindon. And this is a site that the chair, myself, and the vice chair visited yesterday. As you all know, because of COVID restrictions, only 2 of us actually go, and it becomes more practical then. So Mark Nuttall is going to take us through this this item. So,
thank you, Chair. I'll just very briefly turn my video on so that, just for the record, really, so that people can see that it's me. My connection's not good at all today, so I won't leave it on because I expect it will cause problems. There we go. Good morning, everybody. So, as the chair says, this application is in Grindon, and the application is for the renovation of an existing dwelling and the conversion of attached agricultural buildings and a freestanding agricultural building to both extend the residential accommodation and to provide a small cafe. As you can see on the location plan here, the property is on the eastern edge of Grindon, and it's within the conservation area boundary. If we can have the next slide, please. So this shows the existing block plan of the site. So the road runs down the left-hand side of that side as you look at it, sort of north to south. Well, it's not north to south, rather up and down as you see it on this plan anyway. The house itself is it's the larger building of the 2 there, and it's the house is currently restricted to the left-hand side of that building, as you'll see on some further plans. The remainder are agricultural buildings, as is the smaller separate building facing the road. And you can just about see on that plan there that if you look at that the smaller building on the left facing the road, that building line continues north. Sorry, it is not north. It's because of the way we're looking at the plan. It's west, roughly west, and that's actually the neighbouring property which is attached to that barn. And again, you'll see that better on the further plans and indeed on the photographs. Next slide, please. So this shows the front elevation of the main property. You're looking back towards the road there, and the roads, you can probably just about see the boundary wall at the back of the image. The road's running across the back there. This end of the building that we're closer to, where the photo is taken from, is the other buildings that are in agricultural use, or at least were last in agricultural use. You can see they're in a pretty poor state of repair, and the building's been empty for some time. Next slide, please. And this shows the other end of that same building, and that's the area that was most recently used as a dwelling, and historically has been used as a dwelling as well. And beyond there, you can see the gable end of the roadside barn. Next slide, please. Thanks. And this is just a closer view of the single-storey element at the north of the group. Next slide, please. And there's a view looking back down along the front, so essentially from just within the site, and it really is just to show the setting of the building, and its position on the edge of the village with the fields beyond. And this is looking back towards the road again, so this is the single-storey lean-to, which is a later addition on the end of the building group. And next slide, please. And this looks down the rear, so you can see the neighbouring property behind the planting on the right of the screen there. And let's say you're looking down the back elevation of the main building, and you can see that there's an offshot that's been added to the building there, a lean-to running off the back as well. And here's the view from the road. So you can see the main property just on the right of the photo there, and in front of that the barn, the freestanding barn, which is attached to the neighbouring property, as you can see there. The grassed area that you can see in front of the barn, and indeed in front of that metal fencing or gate, is not in the applicant's control. That's common land, it would appear, although the ownership isn't entirely certain, but it's certainly not in the applicant's ownership. Next slide, please. Thanks. And this is showing the current gap between the main house on the right and the barn on the left, and the relationship to the property behind. As you'll see on the proposed slides as we go through, it's intended to put a link extension in there to link the 2 elements of accommodation. And this is another slide showing the more of a view back towards the neighbouring property. So you can see between the barn and the attached house, there's a relatively tall stone wall and some planting. So this is the existing ground floor plan. And as I explained when we looked at the photographs, you can see that the dwelling itself is restricted to the, as you look at that, to the left-hand part of the main building, with the rest of it having previously given over to cow sheds with haylofts above, and a building described as a workshop on the right-hand side there, which that's the sort of the single-story lean-to on the end, which you saw in the photographs. As far as we're aware, it's agricultural use as well. There's no suggestion that it was any other type of workshop. And then on the left there, you can see the barn and the boundary wall connecting it back onto the main property. Next slide, please. And there's the first floor plan of the main building. The other buildings don't have additional floors, and so you can see again that the left-hand side there is the house, and the agricultural hayloft above the cow shed on the right. Next slide, please. And so here's the existing front elevation. The dilapidated shed that you can see there between the house and barn is actually now gone, as you'll probably have noticed in the photograph. So that's no longer there. But otherwise, the buildings are largely as they appear here. Some window frames and glazing are missing, just such as the condition of the building. And here's the north east end with the lean-to, and it just gives you an idea of the form of the building. And again, you can see the neighbouring property of Grove Cottage behind, as it were, and to the right. And here you're looking from the road again, back at that barn and the attached neighbouring property. And the rear elevation of the property as well. So this is the side that partly faces towards Grove Cottage, although the neighbouring garden doesn't extend along the full length of this building. And here's the proposed roof plan. So you can see the link extension that I mentioned there between the house and the barn. That's been amended during the course of the application. It was originally much deeper and of different form, and we recommended that something that was more lightweight and reduced in size would much better maintain the separation, the visual separation between the barn and the main building. You can just about make out these 4 parking spaces dotted on the sort of bottom left corner of that plan. And 2 of those are for the dwelling, and 2 of those are for the proposed cafe use. And the 2 dwelling ones are behind the cafe use ones. The Highway Authority are comfortable with that arrangement, given the scale of use and the fact that both are in the same control. Final surfacing for the site isn't agreed, although it's expected that there would be paving for the vehicles to park on. The rest of it would be, if the application was to be approved, would be reserved by condition. You can also see at the top right there that a package treatment plant is proposed. That's raised some concern during the application from some of the objectors in terms of its position relative to the property and to the property boundaries, in terms of its compliance either with building regulations or with the manufacturer's recommendations. We have sought confirmation on that from the Building Control Office, and they've advised that, having inspected the site and the proposals, they're comfortable with what's proposed. So we don't foresee any issues arising further down the line in that regard. Behind the single-story lean-to on the right there, you can also make out there's an air source heat pump, and there would be bin storage there as well. See if we can have the next slide now, please. So there we go. That's the proposed front elevation of the barn. This has had some amendment as well in terms of the detailing of openings. So it's now proposed to refenestrate the openings so that they retain the distinction between the agricultural and the domestic parts of the building, whereas originally the same design of windows was sort of carried through. We're much more comfortable with the arrangement as it's proposed now. And you can see there also the glazed link, which is set back between the barn and the main house. Next slide, please. And this is showing the end elevation again. So other than refenestrating the openings, there's no changes here. I should point out that other than the 2 roof lights in the roof, there's no new openings proposed to any of the buildings. It would work with the building's existing openings. Next slide, please. And so this is the roadside elevation again. You can see a wall ties proposed in the barn there, because structurally the internal trusses and roof supports are starting to fail. But otherwise, you'd have frameless glass doors with sort of a boarded door that could close over the front when the cafe use wasn't taking place. Next slide, please. And the rear elevation. So you can see there the 2 roof lights that I mentioned before, as well as the positioning of the air source heat pump. And obviously the back of the link there as well is that sort of section of roof you can see up towards the right-hand side. Next slide, please. And here's the proposed ground floor plan. So in terms of the main building, that all becomes a dwelling. So the parts currently or most recently in agricultural use are taken into the domestic dwelling, and that would just form a single house. And then on the left-hand side in the roadside barn, there's a lot of detail on that plan, but essentially as you look at that, the top half of it is cycle storage for those using the cafe, whereas the bottom half is given over to a staircase going up to a partial mezzanine, and there'd be roughly 4 square meters of seating space. So the cafe size in total is 8 square meters, with 4 meters on the ground floor and roughly the same on the first floor as well. Next slide, please. Sorry, actually, if we can just go back, there's something else I should just refer to on there. Thank you. You can see there's a toilet proposed in the lean-to off the back of the main house, and also that the barn would maintain access through to that for visitors of the cafe. Because of the levels inside the barn, it's also proposed that for that toilet to be accessible, users could come out through the front of the barn and go through the glazed link, and then they'd be able to gain level access to that toilet facility. Because of the size of the cafe, it's only 8 square meters. It's proposed that it's going to make use of use the house as kitchen facilities essentially. And so again, obviously access is available from there through to the cafe where people could be served. Thanks. Next slide. And there we go. So on the left there, sort of floating on its own, that's the first floor, the mezzanine floor of the cafe, which is just under 4 square meters of seating space once you take account of the aisles. And then immediately below that, you've got a section plan through the barn, which shows the extent of the mezzanine. So it's restricted to effectively a quarter of the floor plan of the barn. And then on the right-hand side there, you've got the first floor of the house as well. So you can see it would be a 3-bed property. And on the right-hand section, there would be a mezzanine in the lower building that's attached to the main property. Next slide, please. Okay, that's it. Thanks. So in terms of the merits of the application, we're satisfied, as I've explained, that the amended plans you've just seen sufficiently conserve the heritage interest of the buildings whilst providing them with a viable use. That's important because the buildings have been concluded to be non-designated heritage assets, and so their conservation and sustainable use is welcomed and supported by policy. Some objections have been raised to the proposed cafe use, mostly on amenity and highway grounds. As amended, the cafe is limited to only 8 square meters though, and we're satisfied that at that size, and with daytime only opening hours, that's not going to give rise to any amenity concerns. In terms of traffic movements and parking associated with the cafe use, again, the size is such that any impacts arising are going to be pretty small. The level of parking proposed does accord with highway standards, and the Highway Authority have raised no objections to the application. And conditions could be imposed to restrict the cafe use to the area shown on the plans, just for the sake of clarity, and because use of additional areas such as the outside space, for instance, that's actually not in the applicant's control, could give rise to further concerns in terms of either amenity issues for the neighbour, or indeed, if the cafe was to become larger and larger, potentially to highway concerns further down the line. The application accords with adopted policy in all other regards as well. And on that basis, and having accounted for all of the material considerations, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. We have three speakers on this item. The first one is Mr. Rob Webb, an objector. So over to Alden House for Mr. Webb's statement, please.
This is a statement from Mr. Robert Webb regarding item 7. With reference to the summary produced for the committee meeting, please can I mention number 6 to clarify. Access from road over a strip of verge to Town End is a 4 to 5 metres and up to 10 metres in depth from the highway to the field wall. Number 8, the access across the road facing the barn is to Back Lane, used by many neighbours, residents, and accommodate public access to a well-used public footpath. Number 12, the barn, where the cafe is proposed, it may be freestanding from the Town End cottage, but it is attached to the neighbouring property, Grove Cottage. In the design and access statement, it is said that Grindon has the highest level of second and holiday homes. We are only aware of only one second home in the parish. The local bus is the Moorlands Connect, just one bus which requires advanced booking, is not regularly available during certain hours of the day and does not operate at weekends. Introducing a cafe to this property will change the settlement. Many choose to live and work from home because of its setting, the natural beauty of the view out across and along the valley, a Peak District Dales special area of conservation, and the Hampson Manifold Valley Triple SI of hills, fields, dry stone walls and trees. No cafes or shops visible anywhere. That's why people visit, to appreciate the unchanged natural landscape of the national park. The summary says that the immediate impact upon neighbours will be better with a cafe business than if the property returned to a small agricultural holding. Living here, we are very accustomed to agricultural noises and smells. It comes with the territory. We're used to people passing by our homes, but stopping to queue for a coffee, standing around to drink that coffee, that would impact our privacy. This will be a business reliant upon visitors all day, every day. The majority of customers will be in cars, and when there is no room inside the property's curtilage, where will they park without impacting upon those of us who live and work here too? It is the special quality of this area that needs to be understood, to be protected, and will be lost with this development. The greatest day-to-day impact from this business development will be on the local community. I trust the committee have carefully considered all the aspects of the comments provided by the Parish Council and residents. Residents feel they are being pressured into accepting this business development. The application does not preserve or enhance the natural beauty of the area. There is no local demand for a cafe, plus the application is impractical for such a small site with extremely limited on-site parking, 1 to 2 vehicles and limited access. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. The next one then is Mr. Andrew Gagey, and again a statement to be read out by Democratic Services.
This is a statement by Mr. Gagey regarding item 7. I am writing on behalf of my wife, a neighbouring landowner. I note the officer's recommendation for approval of this application. Please take the opportunity to visit the site prior to your decision so that you do so with your own full understanding of what the planning permission will grant. Several parts of the application have been materially challenged and ultimately withdrawn, reduced in scale, corrected, and limited by proposed conditions to achieve the officer's recommendation. The list of proposed conditions is an indication of the inappropriate nature of the site for this development. The conditions will rely on the good nature of the applicant to ensure they are adopted. Will all customers be asked if their mode of transport to the site has been parked within the application site prior to them being served? Furthermore, the officer's recommendation relies on 2 dubious and unsubstantiated opinions of the highways officer and the building inspector. The highways officer assumed a low usage for the cafe based on the site being small and having 2 parking spaces. There has been no evidence provided or comparisons made with other similar sites to support this. The facilities at Wetton Mill provide a comparison of how a small premise can attract many customers, but Wetton Mill has a public car park and cycle path stroke footpath close by, which will help to offset conflicts between users of the public highway. Imagine cars and bikes parked outside this site and then judge whether it is reasonable to assume there will be a minimal impact on users of the public highway. The building inspector is vague in his reference to the requirements for the installation of a package treatment plant. Neighbouring landowners are being dealt with inequitably and potentially their properties could be undermined and flooded. The site is not large enough to accommodate the installation of the package treatment plant in accordance with building regulations and the general binding rules and certified manufacturer's installation specified. The package treatment plant installation is too close to neighbouring properties. The package treatment plant does not include a drainage field. This application contrasts with those made by the Peak District National Park themselves, which do cover these shortcomings. The Planning Committee is familiar with the requirements of these installations when planning permission is applied for. Please consider the rights of the applicant and those of neighbours in equal measure when making the correct decision in assessing this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And the last one is from Dr. Alex Forrester, the applicant, and this should be a video presentation.
Hello, I'm Alex Forrester. Thank you for listening to this short statement. We agree with the assessment and recommendations put forward by the planning officer, and furthermore thank him for the transparent and clear and helpful process that led to them. So we'll just use this short statement to highlight a few of the key benefits of our proposal. We've paid a great deal of attention to the environmental credentials of our proposed development of the property, including specifying natural insulation throughout as befitting this heritage asset. We're really excited that we'll actually be generating energy, renewable energy on the site with the heat pump that we've detailed in the planning application. Of course, it's not just the global environment, but the local environment is important too. The sewage treatment plant and tertiary treatment of phosphorus that we've proposed has been agreed by Natural England. Also, the local ecology, we've been working closely throughout planning and development with a local ecologist, putting in place mitigation strategies for any impact that we might have on the bats and swallows and hedgehog that have been found. In terms of the design itself, it's a rather modest property, but an interesting and historic property, and it's our property. So we're very interested and to conserve the distinctive features that we've highlighted in the planning application. We'll be reusing as many materials as we can and sourcing others locally, working with local craftsmen in terms of the windows and the stonework. As well as our family home, we're proposing, as can be seen from the plans, a very small cafe, a small quiet cafe befitting to a rural area to give welcome rest and sustenance to weary cyclists and walkers, but equally to give somewhere for local people who maybe don't have access to a vehicle or maybe want to reduce their dependence on their car, to give them somewhere to meet and well, just generally be a nice place for them. Once again, thank you for listening to this short statement. I hope you're happy with the application, and I hope that the local residents will be pleased with this this little facility, should it be permitted to go ahead.
So thank you to Alderman House for that. We're now back to members for any questions and any comments on this. Perhaps I could just start off by asking Mark about, just to emphasise the importance that highways have put on this, and the building inspector, because that was mentioned by one of the speakers. Could you just reiterate what was said, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. As originally proposed, the cafe was quite a bit larger, and the parking that was shown to be provided for that on the plans included some of that land outside of the applicant's ownership in front of the site, which is which I pointed out when we looked at the photographs. So that whilst they didn't raise any objections, the Highway Authority at that time queried the parking provision, and we then had discussions back and forth with the Highways Authority and with the applicant, and the applicant was quite prepared to reduce the cafe to 8 square metres. Parking requirements for cafes are 1 parking space per 4 square metres, so it now has 2 and it now meets the necessary requirements. The Highway Authority have actually said in their final comments that even if it had 1 less space, given the size of the development, they'd be very hard pushed to sustain an objection to it. In terms of the package treatment plant, there's probably not a great deal to add to what I've already said on that. The applicant mentioned in his 3 minutes there that that Natural England were satisfied with it as well. They originally asked for further information because of concerns about potential phosphorus levels in outflow from package treatment plants, which they have raised on some other applications in more sensitive locations. The applicant then provided details of how they would mitigate those phosphorus impacts, and Natural England removed any objection and were satisfied that providing those measures were secured, they could support it. As I've already said, in terms of the position of the package treatment plant relative to neighbours and to the property itself, that's not something that we would normally consider from a planning point of view. It's material insofar as we need to have a reasonable confidence that a scheme can go ahead. Which is why we checked with the building control officer for their views on it. At that time, they'd already visited the site. They've inspected a trial pit at the site, and they're satisfied that that will be something that they can gain building control approval ultimately. So I think we've gone as far as we need to and can with that from a planning point of view. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Mark. That's very good. I've got a number of speakers then. So we've got Mike Chaplin, David Chapman, Kath, Ken Richardson and Andrew McCloy. So start with Mike Chaplin, please.
I'm so sorry, Chair. I have left my hand up. I was not planning to speak at this point, so I shall let you move on.
We'll move on to David Chapman then.
Sorry, Chair, my hand wasn't up either.
All right, Kath, are you still waving? Or am I looking at historical notes here?
No, I didn't put my hand up either.
Right. So anybody want to speak at all? Annabelle, thank you. Andrew Gregory, Andrew McCloy. Yeah.
Morning, everyone. It seems that this is a great opportunity for a neglected building to come back into use, which is great. What slightly concerns me is the cafe side, and I think common sense would dictate that the size of a cafe doesn't dictate how busy it gets. And there are inevitable problems arising from that with people outside and also car parking on the road. I'm slightly confused why both are in the same application, and it'd be useful to know whether we have to look at the application as a whole, or whether the cafe part can be looked at separately. And I think officers in the report are implying that if this was refused at committee and then appealed, they can't see, there is a risk of the appeal being upheld because they can't see where policy isn't being met in this case. So some clarification about that would be useful.
Thank you, Annabelle. So Mark, the issue of the cafe being a separate application to the house development.
Yeah, I'll come back on that. I'll come back on the appeal issue first, just whilst it's sort of fresh in my mind. If there was an appeal on the grounds of a lack of parking or highway issues, I think that would be a very difficult position for us to take, given that there's no objection for the Highway Authority and that the proposal does meet parking standards. However, the amenity grounds are obviously a judgment that we have to make. And so if ultimately that was a concern to members, then that that's obviously something on appeal that an inspector would also have to take a view on, and it's not as clearly prescribed as highway standards are, of course. In terms of the scope to effectively issue a split decision and approve one part whilst refusing another, I don't think that we could do that here because there's no other use that's proposed for that building. So I don't think that would be sustainable. I think we would either have to, I think the application would have to be refused as it stood, because to amend it would amend the development description as well, and you'd effectively be into a different application. So if members are uncomfortable with the cafe to the point where they think it needs to be removed from the scheme, then I think that the way forward would have to be a refusal followed by a separate application that didn't include that, if indeed the applicant was prepared to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Andrew Gregory.
Thanks, Chair. Similar points really to Annabelle. Just this point on about, I know we're probably spending a lot of time on this point about the parking, because I think Annabelle's point is a really valid one. You know, that the size of the cafe doesn't dictate its footfall, and I get completely, Mark, the point about it fits the criteria. But I just look, I mean, I've not been to the site, but I just look at the plan, and I look at the fact there's 2 car parking spaces for residential use, and then there's just 2 spaces for the cafe. And I just worry that we're just going to see lots and lots of cars parked on the road in this area. But I hear everything that's been said, and I get, you know, and I get where we are on it. But I just feel, Robert, I should register that concern.
All right, thank you, Andrew. And then Andrew McCloy.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of on the same theme, I noticed in the officer's commentary in paragraph 70 that, Mark, that you say the space and layout would allow for a maximum of 8 customers to be accommodated at any one time. I mean, that's just an estimation, isn't it? There's no, as far as I understand, there's no condition on that. There's no prescription we can put on that. So 8 is likely number, but as other members have said, my worry is that that number is just a stab at what is likely to happen, but there could be more. So I suppose that's one question I've got. The other one is I am convinced that the overall, if we compare it to, say, Wetton Mill, that was one of the speakers mentioned, this is a much smaller site, and what's being proposed is a relatively small scale. So I think comparisons to some of the very big kind of refreshment sites are a little bit unfair. And I think we could condition up to a point, but I also notice that the applicant has another business with cycle touring, and a condition is proposed that no other businesses of the cafe will come with this permission. Is that enforceable? How can we be sure that the applicant over time won't use the premises, and to the extent the cafe, as a centre for the cycle touring business, and as such likely grow in scale and therefore grow in amenity impact? So I think, Mark, I listened to what the speakers and the parish council have said, and I am concerned over amenity impact, but this is a balanced decision, because I think overall, let's take the scale of it, it is commensurate with the village and the surroundings, but there's a fine line here. So can you come back to me on those points, please?
So, Mark, over to you.
Yes, sure. You're quite right, Andrew. In terms of the numbers, 8 is an estimate based on the likely seating capacity of those areas. Then I did my best to see if there's actually any sort of standard practice or guidance in terms of what you can expect and how many people per square metre for a cafe use. It is roughly 1 per metre, whilst there's nothing prescripted, of course, because cafes will squeeze in what they can squeeze in. But realistically, if you put a table in there with 4 chairs, that will use the upstairs, and the same will use the downstairs. That's not to say that more people can't visit the site, like I think Annabelle mentioned, potentially to pick up a coffee or whatever it might be. So there could be more than 8 people at a time trying to use the cafe. Internally, the floor space that's given over to it is likely to only accommodate 8, I'd suggest. In terms of your other question, in terms of whether a condition to prevent other business use here is enforceable, yeah, I think that it is. Obviously, it would be the same as any enforcement. And if you had a dwelling where somebody started to operate a business from it, it's going to be a matter of fact and degree as to when that business use, as to when that becomes a business use rather than a use incidental or ancillary to the use of the main house. Obviously, you know, you'd expect that someone could reasonably homework from within their property without it changing the use. If the use then starts to attract cycle repairs or large numbers of cyclists visiting the site for either to take part in the tours or for other reasons associated with the business, that would have impacts, at which point we would be likely to say a change of use has occurred and you're in breach of your planning condition. So I think that it is something we can control by condition, but clearly it would involve a judgment at some point down the line if it wasn't complied with.
Thank you, Mark. I've got several other speakers, Ken Smith, Patrick Brady, Ian Huddleston. And can I just clarify, Ken Richardson, are you wanting to speak?
I don't think we have up.
Right, okay. So go to Ken Smith, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the business issue, perhaps it might be worth emphasising that when we met yesterday on site, and I think it's in Mark's report, the cycle leader business that is referred to, the intention is not to meet or start from this position, but from other locations. And yes, it may well be that the end of a cycle tour might finish there for some refreshment or even part way through. But I think it's another aspect of the business development that I think we just need to take into account, that it isn't intended to focus it on this location. I acknowledge what others have said about the size of the cafe and the rest, and I've nothing particularly to add to that, apart from the fact that the applicant is committed to, or has committed to, retaining the nub, if you like, of the internal dividing wall, which makes a very fine division between the cycle storage and the cafe on the ground floor. I think we need to bear in mind the cycle storage. It's an attempt to mitigate any impact from visitors to the cafe. It does strike me, I wonder whether it would be appropriate to put condition on to limit or even stop advertising in some way, whether that's even possible, to ensure that perhaps the initial rush or a sustained use of the place isn't out of scale with the size of the cafe that is being proposed. It's just a thought that has occurred to me. But my main issue, or my main concern, my main support for the application is that this location, this property, is on the southeast side of Grindon. It is the gateway property into Grindon from Weeks Bridge. And I think at the moment it's a ruinous property, it's derelict. I think what is being proposed will bring that property back into, it will provide the TLC that is definitely required, and it will enhance that gateway approach into the village. And I think that has to be seen as a bonus for the conservation area and for Grindon generally. And I think that I would support the application on that basis. I think one of the objectors referred to parking and the rest, but also referred to other visitors to the village and their appreciation of its ambience. And one has to ask, well, where do they park? And if there are parking issues in this area, can people be encouraged, if they did overspill the two car parking spaces, can they be encouraged to park in the other places in the village where visitors must already be parking? Just a thought, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. If we move on to Patrick Brady, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We must remember, which I'm sure all members do, but listening to the objections we just heard, that there are two purposes to a national park, and one of them is all the landscape and environment and everything else, and the other, of course, is the promotion of enjoyment. And the provision of a facility like this in this sort of location is the sort of thing you would expect to see in a national park trying to fulfill both of those purposes. So in principle, a cafe somewhere in Grindon must be right. There used to be a very nice pub there, but I think that's now closed. So if you're going for a walk in that area now, I don't know where else you can get refreshment. I don't know whether anybody else has any ideas about that. But in principle, it must be right. The parallel, I think, that is likely to occur between this proposed cafe, with this proposed cafe, is the small cafe on the green at Monash, which is, I guess, not very much different in size. It certainly attracts a lot of cyclists. And what actually happens, and I think this is something which the committee needs to take into account, what actually happens very often, particularly if the weather's up to it, is that they arrive there, they don't sit inside, they go and get their cup of tea or sandwich or whatever it is, bowl of soup, and they sit on the green. And that's one of the very good reasons for that is very often that they're looking after their bicycles or whatever the case may be. And I think car traffic for a cafe of this size is not likely to be a significant issue. It could attract significant visitor numbers, and it could be that they can't all be accommodated inside the cafe. And that's where this piece of land that was referred to, which I think was referred to as common land, but I think looking at the map, it's more likely to be simple highway verge, is likely to become a feature of the use of this site. Now, I'm not entirely clear from the information that we've had exactly which adjoining landowners would be affected by this use and why. But if it did happen in the way that I've just described, that this verge started being used as a place for picnicking cyclists and so on and so forth, who would be directly affected by it, and what would be the problem?
Thank you, Patrick. Can I go now to Ian Huddleston for his comment or question, and then I'll come back to Mark.
It's
Ian.
a question really for Mark. I just wondered, given the restrictions on parking with the cafe, whether it wouldn't be possible to condition it just for cyclist and walking use. You know, it just seems to me logical that would, given the size of it as well, it just seems to me that would be logical. But whether that's possible or not, I don't know. The other one is really just a comment on the cafe as well, and the discussion we had on the previous application in terms of litter that's generated from cafes or coffee giving facilities, whether or not we can't give some thought towards people being encouraged to bring their own refill cups. So the coffee cups aren't actually provided by these facilities, and people have to bring their own things. But I don't know. They're just some thoughts I've had. All right.
Thank you, Ian. So we'll go back to Mark now for some answers. A while ago, Ken mentioned something about limiting advertising, and then Patrick's just been adding there about the use of the land, and similarly Ian. So can we have some answers on those, then, please, Mark?
Sure. I'll do my best on those. In relation to Ken's query about advertising, I'm not sure that such a condition would be enforceable, simply because I'm not sure that how we would actually know if that had taken place. I don't think we could reasonably control that in terms of it's not something we can easily assess or visibly see necessarily, depending on how the advertising was undertaken, of course. In relation to Ian's question about restricting car use, I think we would have the same issue in terms of the enforceability of such a condition. Obviously, we can't monitor a site sufficiently to know if people are doing that, and also I don't know how the owner of the site would stop people visiting the site. He can turn them away when they get there, but by that time they're already there, so the impact would have occurred, and that wouldn't be particularly helpful as a condition anyway. So I don't think we could deal with either of those matters by condition, unfortunately. In relation to Patrick's query about the use of that area of grass in front of the barn, It isn't highway verge. The Highway Authority have confirmed that, which is why I referred to it as common land. As you saw in the photographs at the start, there is a wall of probably where it joins onto the buildings. It's probably about 1.6, 1.7 meters, and then it drops away to a lower height towards the roadside between the barn and the joint neighbouring property. So if people were to stand out and sit out there, I think that the loss of privacy would be relatively limited. I don't think there would be much overlooking of that property or looking through its windows. But there is the potential for noise and disturbance, of course, from people gathering there, albeit it would be during daytime hours. And of course, you know, we wouldn't have control over people moving more freely around the area or standing on the streets or other areas and drinking their drinks or attending to their bikes or whatever it might be. So I hope that helps a bit.
Thank you, Mark. I think it's fair to say from the visit yesterday that there was, I would consider, little chance of being overlooked by this property, even by customers from a cafe. So we've had a good discussion on that. Patrick, you want to come back on something?
I'm going to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Andrew McCloy.
Chair, just a couple of bits of information. Since I know Grindon quite well and I've walked in the Manifold Valley many times, there is a small public car park around the back of Grindon Church that is quite well used by visitors. And the village did used to have a pub, the Cavalier, until about, 20 years ago, something like that. And I take Patrick's point, which is well made, that in even relatively small villages like Grindon, it is not unusual and not unexpected to have a small, appropriately sized refreshment offer. And I'm thinking of the villages around Grindon, like Butterton or Wetton or Uncott. They've got cafes or pubs, sometimes both. And I think it's reasonable that Grindon would have something as well if someone felt that there was an offer there and that there was an audience there. And overall, I'm convinced that the conditions we've got will restrict use satisfactorily. So I will second the recommendation.
Thank you, Andrew. Can I just ask Mark a further question, and that is in the recommendations. There's nothing about external lighting. Is that covered in one of the existing conditions that I haven't really spotted?
I think it could be covered within landscaping, but it's perfectly reasonable to put an explicit separate condition on, just to make that clear. So we could do that, Chair.
I think that would be useful, considering I suppose that it will be sort of dark sky area that we're looking at there.
I agree.
So we've had the motion which has been proposed and seconded for approval of this recommendation with the additional condition. If everyone's happy, we'll move to Alden House for a vote then, please.
Chair, I have a question.
Sorry, yeah,
Sorry.
before we go there, Mike, yeah.
Sorry, finally got my brain in gear. Going back to the parking issue, I have a memory of a previous chair of this authority saying that parish councils can apply for yellow line markings to restrict parking from areas that might be problematic for car parking. Is that the case?
I think it is, but perhaps, I don't know, Mark O'Brien can help us on that one.
In truth, Chair, I don't know if they can. I don't see why they couldn't apply, because I think that actually almost anybody can apply to the Highway Authority for yellow lines. Whether that is approved by the Highway Authority or not, I don't think that the parish council would ultimately have the say on that. I think it would be the Highway Authority who would conclude whether it is appropriate.
Yeah. Okay, Andrew Gregory, are you going to supplement that?
Just to say, I'm definitely no expert on this, Robert, but we have an issue around Macclesfield Forest at the moment about the burning question about whether we should have yellow lines in there. And what I'm told by Cheshire East councillors is that would have to go out for consultation. The council are not in a position where they can come along and paint yellow lines without that kind of process. I think the answer to Mike's question is not an easy one and would need a process and consultation.
Thank you, Andrew. So just to reiterate, the the recommendation has been moved and seconded for approval, so we'll go to Alden House for a vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll read out each of the members' names and ask you if you're voting for, against or abstaining from voting on the item as discussed. Councillor Armitage.
For.
Councillor Brady. Councillor Brady.
Sorry. Well, or
Thank you. Councillor Chaplin.
Still.
Councillor Chapman.
For.
Councillor Gregory. Councillor Gregory.
For.
Thank you. Ms Harling.
Against.
Councillor Hart. Not here, sorry. Councillor Huddleston.
For.
Councillor McCloy.
For.
Councillor Potter.
Against.
Councillor Richardson.
For.
Ms Slack.
For.
Mr Smith.
For.
Councillor Warmby.
For.
And Mr Helliwell.
For.
Okay, thank you, Chair. 2 voted against, but that's carried. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, if we move on now to item 8, and this is another full application for conversion and reinstatement of a building to form one dwelling at Birchcroft, Barrowstones Lane, The Rake, Monash. It's we've seen this before. Tom is going to take us through the details of it.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we've lost Tom temporarily.
As I understand it, Tom has been having some connection issues this
Right.
week since he's been back with his local internet. So hopefully I'll get back on in a moment.
I think I'm back now. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. That's good.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll keep the video off because that seemed to be what affected it.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so the application site is a ruinous field barn that is located to the south of Monash village. It's well outside of the edge of the settlement, so it's in the open countryside in a very isolated position. It's about 400 meters from the nearest neighbouring building. And the ruinous field barn is located within a historic agricultural setting within a fossilised medieval strip field system. So the field barn in its ruinous state and the strip field system are both non-designated heritage assets. As Chair mentioned, this is a site that's been before members twice in the last couple of years. We refused applications in March and June 2019 for the creation of a new open market dwelling at this site. Those applications were both refused for the same 3 reasons, and they were that the proposal would create an isolated new dwelling in the open countryside that would not achieve any conservation or enhancement benefits. The proposal would result in harm to the significance of both the field barn and the strip field system as non-designated heritage assets, and that the proposal, by virtue of the domestication of the site in this open agricultural landscape, would cause significant harm to the landscape character and special qualities of this part of the national park. Now, this application is slightly different in terms of what is being proposed to the building itself, as I will come on to, but the fundamental issues of the impact of creating a new isolated dwelling in this location and the harm to the historic agricultural landscape character very much remain as previous cases, and the changes to the building itself do nothing to overcome those concerns. So again, this application is recommended for refusal for much the same reasons as the previous 2 applications. Okay, if we can move on, please. So this is the proposed site plan. So you can see the barn is accessed by the unmade track known as Barrowstones Lane, a former drover's track from the rake. So it's an unmade green lane. It's also a public footpath, and then the footpath network extends to the north of the site. So it's extremely prominent site for users of the public footpath system. And the proposal is to create a new dwelling, which is the sort of dark blue shaded area on the footprint of the existing barn. There'd be a couple of parking spaces to the western side of the proposed house, and then garden to the south. The blue lines you can see to the eastern side are the smaller area is a package treatment plant that would be used for foul drainage, and then the blue horizontal lines are a soak away for surface water drainage. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we've just got some aerial photos here, and the application site. Sorry, I can't point to it. But it's just where there's a blue marker to the left of the rake. That's perfect. Thank you very much. And this is just to highlight how isolated this is from other built form certainly in the village. You can just see the edge of Monash village at the northeastern corner of this slide. So the site itself is very much set within this historic agricultural landscape. Okay, next one, please. This is just a closer view of much the same thing. So you can see the outline of the ruinous barn, the walls that still remain, and the Barrowstones Lane just to the north of that, and then the agricultural strip field system. Now, since the report was published, I think members have all been copied into a letter from the applicant, which has raised some issue with our assessment of this barn being located within the strip field system. And the applicant has suggested that because of changes to the boundaries and because the barn has historically been enclosed separate to the fields, particularly the two fields immediately to the south of it, that it doesn't lie within the strip field system. But we strongly disagree with that. Even if there has been some separating off of the barn from the nearest fields, it's still read, when in landscape assessment terms, it's still read very, very much has been part of this strip field system, regardless of whether at some point in the past it has been physically divided by boundary walls. So we very much stand by our assessment in the report that this is an integral part of the strip field system and that historic landscape, the historic agricultural landscape. Okay, next one, please. Now, just got some photos, won't dwell on these long, so we've seen them twice before. So just a reminder really of the state that the building is in. So there's very little historic fabric remaining. The northern elevation of the building has completely collapsed. There's one side elevation, which is in a reasonable amount remaining. And then the other two elevations are sort of partially standing. The roof is completely gone and the first floor has completely gone. Okay, the next one, please. This is a view from looking down Barrowstones Lane, so you can just see the barn with its most intact elevation just next to the tree there. So you can see the lane is an unmade track at the moment. It's proposed to resurface that in limestone, which in itself we have some concerns about how, as part of a package really of everything else with the domestication of the site, that's something that we feel will change and harm this historic agricultural landscape. Okay, next one, please. And again, this is from this looking northeast southwest. So again, just to see how isolated it is and how this field barn is very much integrated into the historic strip field landscape. Next one, please. And again, so this is view. So it's a bit blurry. This is looking from the rake, and you can just about see the tree that we were looking at before with the barn next to it. So again, this is just really to highlight the isolated position. It's well away from the village, and it's how it is integral to the historic agricultural landscape in this part of the national park. Next one, please. Okay, so we're just on to the plans now. So as I mentioned, the treatment of the building does differ slightly in this application to the previous one. So the previous applications proposed to effectively level what the limited amount of fabric that is left, the partially standing walls, and then rebuild an entirely new structure that would look how the barn did historically look. The approach now is to retain the walls that stand and then build something new within those walls. So it would effectively be a new dwelling built within the historic walls that would then be tied to the historic fabric. So it should become a bit clearer as we move through the plans. So this is just to show what's the existing first floor plan. If we can move on to the next one, please. And the proposed first floor plan. So similar to the previous applications, it's to create a 3-bedroom dwelling on the footprint of the existing building, essentially, with living, dining and kitchen space to the first floor. So it is it's flipped around the accommodation. If we can have the next one, please. And the existing ground floor. So again, you can just get a sense of the footprint of what remains and what's collapsed. And the next one, please. And the proposed ground floor. So as per the previous scheme, 3 double bedrooms and a bathroom. This is supposed to be an open market dwelling. Next one, please. And then we've just got the existing western elevations, and then as we come on to the proposed elevations, you'll get a sense of what I was talking about with the existing partially standing walls now being retained rather than demolished, and this new structure being built within those. So it'd be a modern new building inside, which would be clad in larch and, as I say, tied then to the remaining limestone walls to give some security to those walls, and then a new clay tile roof is proposed for the covering. Okay, next one, please. So this is the north elevation. It's effectively very little of the north elevation left. What you're actually looking at there is the kind of the inside of the south elevation. The next one, please. And so this is the proposed north elevation. So this is perhaps where the contrast between the historic retained fabric and what is proposed would be most apparent. So you get the sense here the yellow lines are the larch cladding. Then you've got the new roof and these new openings which break through the eaves of the buildings with the windows then continuing into roof lights. So we understand what the applicant has tried to achieve by doing this, and there is some well, we understand what is trying to be achieved in terms of retaining the limited fabric that does remain now. But we don't feel that this is a successful approach. We feel that what you would end up with by doing this is a very uncoordinated hybrid, effectively, where you've got the historic walls of the former barn, then you end up with this hybrid of that mixed with a kind of a modern agricultural building with the timber cladding, and then a very domestic look to the windows and the openings. So we don't feel that this is a successful approach at all. In any case, this is only one of 3 issues, really, because you've still got the other 2 fundamental reasons for refusal about introducing a domestic dwelling of any kind in this location. Okay, if we can move on to the next one, please. And then we've got the south elevation. So this is the one that's more intact. And the next one, please, for the proposed. You see less of a dramatic change there because there is more fabric to start with that is left on the south elevation. And the next one, please. And the existing east elevation. So this is the one you view when you're looking from the rake, and the proposed, which again is a fairly minimal change to this one, with that being the most intact side elevation. So they're the alterations to the building as now proposed. So the scheme is effectively materially different in terms of the approach to using the limited remaining fabric, but the key issues which led to the 2 previous application's been refused still very much remain. You're still creating a new isolated dwelling in the open countryside, which would significantly change the agricultural character of the site, which would have the knock-on effect of domesticating this important historic strip field system. Because, as I say, in our view, the new building would do nothing to conserve, whilst it would physically conserve what remains now, as it would remain in place, those historic walls. But the new building would result in such a dramatic change to the historic character of the barn, it wouldn't achieve any conservation bent or enhancement of the limited fabric that remains now. So all the previous reasons for refusal still very much apply. There's no good reason for us to reach a different decision now to the one that was reached twice in 2019. Approval of this application would, in our view, result in some significant conflict with our policies, and that's in terms of our housing policies, our landscape policies, and our heritage policies. The application, as was the case in both the previous applications, has generated support on the basis of providing housing for a local family. We had this discussion during the last applications. This is not an application for a local needs dwelling. It would be an open market dwelling, so we would have no control at all on who lived there. But in any case, we do acknowledge that the applicants are a local family. This is not the sustainable approach to meeting housing needs within the national park. Our policies are very clear that local needs, affordable houses, should be in or on the edge of villages and not in isolated locations like this. So this carries no weight in favour of the application, as was the case previously. The applicant's agent has provided some information in support of the application in terms of other field barn conversions that have been approved in the national park. I seem to remember that we'd had a similar discussion again during the last application, and none of the examples that are put forward are directly comparable to this. And as you know, each case must be considered on its own merit, so we don't feel that that results in any justification for this application. So ultimately, we're in our view, we're in the same position we were for the previous applications, so it remains the case that the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. We have two representations on this. So the first one is Mrs. Tarr from Monash Parish Council, and this is a statement to be read out by Democratic Services. Thank you.
This is a statement by Mrs. Rachel Tarr regarding item 8. The barn at Birchcroft is considered to be of historical merit. It was a former farm workers' cottage, uninhabited for many years, but without a proposal to bring it back to its former use, it will be lost forever. This proposal will enable the remaining barn to be revived and preserved for many future generations. The committee report says that it will create an isolated new build dwelling. The Peak Park district is characterised by farmsteads in countryside locations, and it will be in keeping with its character. This building is closely related to Monash with an existing access, and it will contribute to the stock of housing of the village. There are other similar barn dwellings on the peripheral of the village that have had planning permitted to make homes for local farming families. Birchcroft is no different to these. The proposal will preserve the ruin and provide a home for a young family whose work contributes to the local farming community and whose ancestors have inhabited and also contributed to the village for generations. It is important to keep villages like Monash alive with younger generations who want to invest in a future within the village and work locally on farms and land within the Peak Park. The Parish Council is strongly in support of buildings within its vicinity of historic importance or merit being brought back to life and preserved for future generations. Planning permission has been passed for other similar barns within our parish that have now been brought back to their former use, and they strongly support preservation and restoration of any such buildings. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And the second speaker by audio recording is Jordan Hotchin, the applicant.
Good morning. Thank you for giving this opportunity to speak and put our case to you. My name is Jordan Hotchin. My husband Jack was born and raised in the village of Moniash, and I am from the adjoining village of Hartington. We currently live in Bakewell due to rising house prices in the village. The opportunity to relocate back to Moniash is provided by a family friend. Over the past 2 years, we have seen the barn fall into disrepair, and it will disappear completely in the near future. The farmer could remove the fallen stone right now without having to carry out any assessment of heritage value. Once the remainder of the barn collapses, he could then remove that too. The planning officer has identified the building as being of heritage importance, but yet is recommending that it should be lost forever. We have full support of the parish council and many local residents who all agree they want to see this lovely field barn restored. They also don't want to see the disappearance of another rural building. To allow the building to fall into further dereliction would lose important reference to the history of the area. Willow Hollow and Benty Grange are just 2 examples of the barns that have been restored to family homes. There are also numerous examples of other converted field barns in locations that are much more remote than this. This revised application differs from the previous application made in 2019. The first is that the structural report shows that we are unable to conserve, stabilise and retain the remains of the existing structure. This existing structure would remain intact and preserved for future generations. We ask you to consider this case very carefully in order for the village of Moniash to evolve and develop a new home for a local family who are going to keep the school open and village and community spirit alive for future generations. Alternatively, we can let the barn fall down and disappear, benefiting no one. It has been recommended for refusal because the proposed development would not conserve or enhance the existing field barn and would harm the character of the agricultural strip fields. However, we are conserving this barn. We are keeping all the existing structure up, which both enhances and preserves for future generations to come. Also, the agricultural sector can dig up strip fields to put sheds on and build new houses for agricultural grounds, but we can't use the remains of the buildings that is already here, harming very little. It just doesn't make sense. It is stated that 57% of barns such as this have been lost from the Peak District landscape. This makes those that survive all more precious. So why wouldn't you approve this application? This is your opportunity to preserve a barn. It is also said that our heritage statement, which shows the barn used to be a dwelling, is weak. Can I ask how? These are historic records which everyone will use. Does that mean that all historic records are weak? We are very passionate about this barn and returning to Moniash. We want to cause as little impact as possible to the village and surroundings, as we love it as much as anyone. We have no intention of building this to sell on. This would be our forever family home. This is our only opportunity to return to our village due to escalating house prices and second homes. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you for that. We now go over to members for any questions and comments. While you're thinking about that, members, could I ask Tom, is Barrowstones Lane, has it got any designation? Is it a non-designated heritage asset or anything? Sorry, can't hear you, Tom. It's
turn your video off.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I think you could certainly make a case that it's part of the wider historic agricultural landscape and the historic medieval fossilized strip field system, because it was a drover's lane, so it's very likely that that will have been used as the access to each of the strip fields. So yeah, I think you can say it's integral, and because we're saying that the strip field system is a non-designated heritage asset, I would say that the lane is part of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, fine, thank you.
Should just add as well, Chair, that the parish do recognise the value of the Drovers Lane in their own response. So there's a lot of support locally, we see that, but they recognise the value of this as a separate feature. And I think that is important, that the walled landscape provide tracks and enjoyed routes, through into that landscape. And that change to that would be significant in itself, I think. And it also recognises why in the development plan, we do talk a lot about the role of the field barns as they are mentioned in our landscape strategy. So we put weight on our landscape strategy to describe these features. And while we use criteria in the policy on conversion, so DMC 10 is the core policy here, but we describe the fact that the more remote barns present the biggest challenge. And that's because they lie deeper in the historic field systems. The buildings and setting are more susceptible to landscape change and loss of character. And that is reflected strongly in the landscape strategy itself. So I think those features come together and all add weight. So it's just to recognise that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Andrew McCloy.
Chair, I'm only going to make a brief contribution, and I want to hear what other members have to say. I understand what Brian said there, but it's also clear that Monash Parish Council do support this application overall. It's obvious for all to see as well that there's an inherent tension, isn't there, in our approach to field barns, because we've got detailed submission from our senior archaeologist, who confirms that 57% of field barns have been lost across the Peak District landscape, and she says that makes those survival the more precious. And yet, if we reject this application, the likelihood is here's another field barn that will disappear. So I do have other problems with this application in terms of the hybrid design. I think it is uncomfortable, and I'm not sure visually whether it holds together. I also accept that it is outside of the village as well. That's a salient point. But nonetheless, field barns are such an important part of our landscape, especially our White Peak landscape. We have a tension here that we can't resolve, because if we don't find a future use for them or assist landowners to safeguard them, they will carry on disappearing. I give no obvious answer to that, but this is a difficult application. But judged on policy, I can't see much in the way of option that we've gone down before to refuse it. But I want to hear from other members.
Chair, could I just come in very quickly? Sorry to interrupt.
Tom,
just
sorry,
on
yes.
I think it's a really good point Andrew makes there, but I think it's also important to recognise that converting field barns to houses is not always an inherently good thing, and it doesn't always result in conservation and enhancement. We do see schemes where that does happen, and there are other ways to use these buildings. We had a scheme at the authority recently, a programme of restoration of historic field barns for agricultural use, so where grants were made available to land and building owners. So converting them to houses is, like I say, basically it's not the only option, and it's not always a good option, which in our view is very much the case here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Kath, did you have your hand up? You cannot see you.
Yes, Chair, I did. I can recall, I don't know if Andrew was on the National Park then, but some years back, this side of Monash, from Bakewell to Monash, on the left-hand side, you're going towards Monash, on the very top, there was, in the distance, a field barn, and it was down for refusal. And the members approved it. And I can honestly say that I feel exactly the same over this barn. Something needs to be done. It's an eyesore. Do we really want eyesores in the national park? It takes years to degenerate to this. So let's do something positive and make something useful. I just feel it's totally unacceptable to leave it to go to rack and ruin. I really do. Thank you.
Thank you, Kath. I feel like an eyesore is like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. I've got Mike Chaplin, Patrick. I've also got Ken. Ken got his hand up first. So Ken Smith, please.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, briefly, I don't see any significant change in the sufficient to make us review the decisions that we've made twice already with regard to this barn. I think we need to, forgive me if this extends, but the barn is 400 meters, almost half a kilometer from the edge of the settlement. I think Tom's first slide demonstrated that ably. It's within the field system. Of course, it's a long way from the settlement. Before the enclosure of the out farms, of the area, the common land beyond the medieval field system, most of the farmsteads were within the village. And the reason why we have barns in some distance from the village is because it was such a long way from the settlement, that it was deemed most appropriate in agricultural terms then to house stock and feed outside the farm, outside the settlement. It is a distance; it's way out from the settlement of Monash. And frankly, there's so little of it left. I think we have to acknowledge that we can't conserve everything. And what we should be doing is focusing our attentions on those barns that are in the better condition, demonstrate the most appropriate elements of agriculture in the past. I mean, if this was an animal, frankly, I think we have the RSPCA on our back. It should have been put down years ago. It's a ruin. There's a difference between trying to conserve something that is in reasonable condition and can provide a sustainable future to effectively rebuilding. That was what the first two applications are about: demolish it and rebuild. And we had an engineer's report that said the walls were so unstable that was the only way forward. And now we're being told they can be retained, all right, as a shell, but as a shell to something which, frankly, in design terms might be great, but is completely inappropriate for a location like this in the middle of nowhere. Again, we're into areas of domestication of the locality of the building. All the bits and pieces, gardens, washing lines, small sheds and the rest of it that lead to that domestication, that urbanization. And frankly, the upgrading of the track from the roadway to the property is just going to make matters worse. It's a very narrow lane. It's also used by pedestrians. There's an immediate set of tensions, as well as things like that dedication of that property, the dark skies issue, the light pollution and the rest. I mean, I think if we approve this, it's coach and horses through our policies for conserving the national park landscape and its special qualities. And I really don't see any merit in it. I would be happy to move the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, Ken. Can I go to Mike Chaplin, please?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to pick up on the assertion made by one of the speakers that there has been a history of domestication of this barn, but in fact what we're calling a barn has actually been a dwelling place for an agricultural worker's family. And I have to say I would have been more impressed if that had been properly researched, because that should show up in census records and possibly in parish records as well. But I think, like Ken, this application, if this has in fact been a barn for most of the time, then I think with the policies that we have before us, we have to go with the policies, the GSPs, the L1 and 3, and the DMCs. They're all pointing us in the direction of not having development in the open landscape. Thank you, Chair.
Are you willing to second the motion, Mike?
I will, Chair.
Thank you. Patrick.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Andrew summed up some of the dilemmas in it very, very well, actually. And I would agree with him that one of the issues about what we've got in front of us is that the actual proposal in terms of its visual presentation and so forth is something that would have to be worked on if members were inclined to approve it. My concern here is actually, amongst other things, about both realism and consistency. I mean, we're going on about, oh gosh, there'll be something on the character of the road will be changed. The character of lanes, private lanes to fields and things in this national park are changing all the time. Farmers are always putting chatter down, and it settles in, and before very long, nobody notices a difference. What I find quite interesting about the fact that this is in Monash is that there are two fairly recent barn conversions that have been approved by the committee, which are both for barn conversions well outside the village. One of them is the one that Kath referred to, off Horse Lane in Taddington, which was further away from the village than this. The written report we had advocated refusal, but that advice was contradicted when we were on the planning committee bus, and it was approved. And that involved a brand new road going across a new field, across a field to get there. The barn was of no special interest, but it now settles perfectly pleasantly into the countryside and causes not a jot of problem. The other is another barn, also further away from the village of Monash, on Tag Lane. A barn, what's more, that was refused planning permission on numerous occasions before suddenly, out of the blue, we had a recommendation to approve its conversion to a house. Now that was on a road, it wasn't in the middle of an open field, but it was nonetheless quite far outside Taddington, outside Monash. There is a consistency issue here. And interestingly, when the Tag Lane application was approved, we had on the same agenda two other applications for barn conversions. One of them at Sycamore Barn, Longner, where there were concerns about whether too much of it would have to be knocked down in order to restore it, and also about this question of domestication of the landscape. In the end, the committee refused it. Officers permitted it some months later, and there were conditions or agreements or something put on to ensure that that domestication did not occur. Also at the same meeting, the committee approved a barn conversion on the road between Winster and Bonsall, where the same concerns, this is going to be domestication in the open countryside. But as you drive past it now, it looks absolutely fine in the landscape. So, you know, first of all, we need to be consistent. And secondly, we need to recognize that there are real ways in which we can secure barn conversions without necessarily causing all the side effects that we're always threatened with on these occasions. There are things that can be constructively done to preserve the best of these barns. Now, I have some sympathy with Ken's point that there is a point with some of these things where it's probably better to put it down than to keep it in useful existence. That's a judgment that has to be made when we get there. As far as I'm concerned with this particular application, I feel that something can be done with this barn, but I don't think what we've got in front of us is the right answer.
Thank you, Patrick. Any further comments, questions, Annabelle? William, I've spotted you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Patrick's last comments in that I don't think this is the right design for this spot, and I have concerns about the track, which is obviously of some historical interest. However, I do support the fact that it's a local family looking to build somewhere to live, and I think we need to think very seriously about a roadmap to save these field barns. And I understand that some of them can be restored for agricultural use, but I can imagine that use is very, very limited given modern agricultural methods. So really we need to find some way of these being viable. I agree with Patrick that for me it would be preferable to retain the field barns in some sense, and permit a degree of domestication around those buildings in order to give them a future life, which can be controlled. The appearance can be controlled by condition and so on. So I don't see that that's an insurmountable issue. And yes, isolated position, but then a lot of cottages are already in isolated positions. And what really is the difference between a field barn and a cottage isolated in the landscape? So I'd like to understand, just on a general policy point, what is the roadmap to save these field barns, such as they can be saved? And I commend, the local family trying to create a home on this particular field barn. I don't think this is the right design, and there are some other concerns. But perhaps a way forward is to allow conversion of these barns with control over domestication and some kind of local restriction. And perhaps that would give a way to conserve these barns in some way for the future. If we don't do that, they're all going to fall down.
Thank you, Annabelle. I'm just going to go to Brian. William, I'll come back to you in a minute. Brian, would you like to just respond to that about field barns?
Yeah, just a couple of points there. Starting with kind of Patrick's point and then leading into Annabelle's, really, that the consistency point is affected by changing policy. And, that was something that we observed when we looked at Tag Lane, because obviously the core strategy came in and members specifically wanted us to be more positive about barn conversions right back from 2011. So the way we've kind of looked at that, and it's been developed through the development management policies, is to keep our development strategy focused around villages and farmsteads, and then to actually describe the role of roadside barns, but then to progressively talk about the sensitivities of the open landscape. So that was the kind of passage I read earlier, and kind of continuing in that passage, it actually talks about the fact that roadside barns offer the next best opportunity, and that's where we've seen a lot of the permissions that we've granted over the last few years. It will always be more challenging in the open landscape because of the introduction of that change, and it is always difficult to control the domestic nature. We can put removal of permitted development rights on. Very difficult to control the expansion of garden space and the things that people put into that space. So I think that's where that becomes difficult, Annabelle. It's just there's degrees of control through permitted development, but not what people can do quite informally within those spaces. So you have to come back to a principle then at some point. And I think that roadmap actually is partly about the planning process, as Tom said, but then also about what we can do as a National Park Authority. So there's work that the landscape projects are thinking about, the ELMS scheme, the specific projects with National Parks England to kind of think about funding into the areas. And those are the ones that can then deal with the more remote barns. And we've seen some good examples of that recently. That's the kind of balance. But you find these shades of grey in the middle, don't you, about where the judgments lie and where the sensitivities are. That's about as far as the development plan goes at the minute, just about encouraging within the development strategy, roadside barns next, and then increasing sensitivities. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. William.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to draw your attention to the barns that you've turned down. Ken went into great things saying that this barn had basically had it. I remember not very long ago, there were a number which the Chatsworth Estate put that they wanted to convert. Some of those were roadside, and they were all turned down, if I remember. So there was no consistency there at all. The planning officer has mentioned about converting these barns, going back to agricultural use. Well, the average tractor these days is about 9 feet high. So how on earth do you get that through a little door that's already there? Well, you can't, and they can't be converted. We've also had the planning officer say about the number of barns that have been lost. Well, they're going to continue to be lost if you keep turning them down. And then we've had other people wanting to live local people, young people wanting to live in the national park. And there's very little provision. They can't afford to live there, and they're trying their best to actually live in the national park and work in the national park. And the core principles that you've got are just working against them. And I've said time and time again that you're going to end up with a national park that's going to be akin to an old people's home. And that's my things. And I can't go with this plan of the outward description. I don't like that at all. It should be a stone barn and left as stone. So that's my thing. And I'm very split on this. They are, Chair. That's my feeling.
Thank you, William. Finally, I've got Ken's got his hand up again. So Ken Smith.
Just to say, Chair, that I think the discussion that's gone on for the last 10, 15 minutes underlines for me the need for us to remember that we need to look at these on a case-by-case basis. I don't think there will ever be consistency because of the differing imperatives that drive different developments and that drive different recommendations to us from officers. We can all pick out examples that suit our arguments. I'm as guilty of it as the next. But I think we have to look at each case on its merits and make our decision accordingly. And on that basis, that's really why I was moving this recommendation, because I don't think this is a case that has any sufficient merit for any alternative recommendation.
Thank you, Ken. So the motion has been proposed and seconded that the recommendation that the application be refused. So we'll now go to Alden House for a vote, then, please.
Thank you, Chair. As before, I will call out each member's name and I'll ask you to let me know if you're for, against or abstaining on the vote as discussed. Sorry, on the item as discussed. Councillor Armitage.
Against.
Councillor Brady.
Against.
Councillor Chaplin.
For.
Councillor Chapman.
For.
Councillor Gregory.
For.
Ms Harling.
For.
Councillor Hart. Oh, sorry, keep forgetting he's not here. Councillor Huddleston.
For.
Councillor McCloy.
For.
Councillor Potter.
Against.
Councillor Richardson.
Councillor Richardson.
For.
Ms Slack. Ms Slack. Oh,
Shouldn't be voting.
Abstaining on this item. Mr Smith.
For.
And Councillor Warmby.
Against.
So that's 4 voted
Excuse me,
against.
you
Oh,
haven't got
sorry,
to check.
Robert. Sorry. Councillor Halliwell.
And
Mr Halliwell.
I'm for the motion.
Apologies for that, sorry. So yeah, there are 4 voted against, 1 abstain, and so that's carried, Chair.
Thank you, members. So our last item for today is the head of law report. And Brian, are you taking us through this?
Hi, yeah. So just to say, there's some cases in here that I've supplied some summaries for over the last few weeks. So the Crowdicott, Checkers Inn and Hollow Meadows cases, I've given you a bit more of a summary and input on the findings. So hopefully they're useful for you. Try and keep doing that as we go forward, just to unpick, what the implications and detail of the inspectors have said. We've had a decision in on the appeals lodged at the start of the paper. we've had a decision in on the Bakewell Stony Close case as well, and that's also been dismissed. So obviously waiting on the second case there, but other than that, nothing else.
Any questions? Andrew McCloy.
Brian, I was like you, I was slightly perturbed at the decision on Hollow Meadows at Sheffield. That raises some worrying points, and I know you've addressed it in a note to members. I'm grateful for that. Do you think we should be worried beyond simply the decision of one particular inspector? Are there implications for policy here?
I didn't think so. I mean, the only thought I had was, depending on the nature of, he hasn't challenged the plan. He hasn't said the plan is out of date or inconsistent. It's just put more weight on the framework. So you could say he's within his kind of capability to do that. So that doesn't concern me. But I didn't like the fact that he's gone very much down a line of sustainable development and setting all of our policy exceptions for what's appropriate in the open landscape to one side, which really suggests he's not really taken the national park context properly into account. I'm most inclined, I think, to write to PIMS, I think, on that basis and just say that, not expecting them to overturn the decision, but I think it's an important point just through their training and, and the allocation of officers, just to understand that those exceptions are there to achieve our position on protection of the open landscape. If you look at an OS map, you will see this very thin slither in the Hollow Meadows area surrounded by open moorland. It's not a settlement. It's just a kind of historic collection of buildings that has actually now been approved to be consolidated, which was the concern of members at the committee decision. How far can you go with continued development in isolated locations? So those are the concerns which we've all had. And I think I would be inclined to put back to planning inspectorate. That's about as far I think it goes, Andrew.
Chair, thank you, Brian. I would endorse a short communication with PINS over that, just to underline our position on it. But I think I concur with your view on that. And then finally, Chair, I'd like to note with satisfaction that the appeal for the extension stables adjacent to the Chequers Inn Froggatt was dismissed, and I'd like to thank the Planning Service for standing by what was obviously a sound planning decision. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for mentioning that. That's a good outcome. Any further questions or comments? If there are no further questions, could I have someone to propose and to second the paper? Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Patrick. And again, if you just all raise your hands in approval. Thank you. Yep. Thank you very much. So that's the final item for today. Thank you very much for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you again for the April meeting. Thank you.
All right, Robert.
Bye for now.
Thanks a lot.
Goodbye, everyone.
Take care. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.